Tonight, we're telling the unbelievable true story of how a single dead body helped change the course of World War II. It's a tale of espionage, deception, and quiet genius, where British intelligence used imagination, illusion, and a man who never was, to fool Hitler himself. This is the story of Operation Mincemeat, a daring plan that saved thousands of lives, outsmarted the Nazis, and redefined the rules of modern warfare. So, before we all get nice and comfortable, take a moment, if you haven't already, to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And let us know where in the world you're watching from tonight. Now settle in as we explore this extraordinary chapter of history, and we hope it helps you learn while you sleep. It was the winter of 1942, and Europe was burning. World War II had raged for over 3 years, leaving a trail of devastation across the continent. Hitler's armies had conquered much of Western Europe, and the Nazi war machine showed little sign of slowing. The Eastern Front was a bloodbath. North Africa remained a fierce battleground. The Allies needed a breakthrough, and they needed it soon. In London, a small room deep within the British Admiralty pulsed with quiet urgency. Maps lined the walls, red pins marked enemy positions, and the air smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and damp wool. It was in this room, not on the battlefield, but in the minds of strategists, that one of the most audacious operations of the war was about to be born. The Allies were planning an invasion of southern Europe. North Africa was nearly secured, and the next logical step was Italy. But there was a problem: Sicily. Everyone knew Sicily was the key. If you wanted to strike Europe from Africa, you went through Sicily. It was obvious, too obvious. Hitler knew it. Mussolini knew it. Every military planner knew it. And that was the problem. The Germans had heavily fortified the island. If the Allies attacked there, they would face brutal resistance and catastrophic losses. So the British needed the Germans to believe they were going to invade somewhere else, and they needed to make that lie believable enough to move Nazi divisions away from Sicily. Enter the 20 Committee, known as the XX Committee, where XX cleverly stood for Double Cross. This top-secret unit was responsible for turning enemy spies into double agents and running misinformation campaigns to deceive the Axis powers. They had pulled off small deceptions before, but now they needed something bigger, something bold, something the enemy would never suspect. That's when an eccentric British naval intelligence officer named Ewan Montagu stepped forward. Montagu, a barrister by training, had joined naval intelligence at the outbreak of the war. Sharp, creative, and comfortable operating in the gray space between fact and fiction, Montagu proposed a plan so strange it bordered on absurd, but it just might work. The idea was to plant false documents on a dead body and let the Germans find it. The documents would suggest that the Allies planned to invade Greece and Sardinia, not Sicily. If the Germans believed it, they might redeploy forces away from the real target. It would be called Operation Mincemeat. At first, there was skepticism. Using a corpse as an intelligence delivery system was morbid, risky, and unprecedented. But slowly, the idea gained traction. Admiral John Godfrey, head of British naval intelligence, saw potential. So did Charles Chumley, a quirky, bird-like intelligence officer with a flair for elaborate plans. Together, Montagu and Chumley set to work. The first step was acquiring a body, a believable, recently deceased man with no connections, no family, and no one to come looking. That search would prove delicate and haunting. But they found their man, and soon, they would create an entirely new identity for him, complete with love letters, photographs, and personal quirks. He would become Major William Martin of the Royal Marines. But this was more than a corpse and a costume. It was a psychological game. The success of the plan would depend not only on tricking the Germans, but also on making the delivery appear utterly accidental, a tragic casualty of war, washed ashore with secrets in his pocket. The trap was being set. And in the shadows of London, a new kind of weapon was being forged, one built from lies, illusion, and the quiet genius of unlikely spies. To deceive the Nazis, the British needed a man who didn't exist, but who felt completely real. In early 1943, Ewan Montague and Charles Chumley began crafting the identity of Major William Martin, a fictional officer of the Royal Marines. But it wasn't enough to simply invent a name and rank. They had to build a life, a history, a personality, and even a romantic relationship, all backed by authentic, convincing details. This wasn't a matter of throwing on a uniform. They needed to sell a story to Hitler's most paranoid intelligence officers. To the world, Major Martin would appear as an unfortunate victim of war, a man killed in a plane crash off the coast of Spain, his body washing ashore with a briefcase chained to his wrist. Inside that briefcase would be top-secret documents, planted to mislead German high command. But to make the illusion work, the entire package, the body, the clothes, the papers, and the man's backstory, had to be flawless. First, they needed the right corpse. After extensive and very discreet searching, British intelligence approached Bentley Purchas, a coroner in London who had access to unclaimed bodies. One, in particular, fit the criteria: a homeless man who had died from phosphorus poisoning, likely from ingesting rat poison. He had no next of kin and no official record that would draw attention. He was a man lost in the shadows, perfect for the role of a man who would never be remembered under his real name. The body was preserved and prepared with extreme care. It was dressed in the uniform of a Royal Marine officer, complete with insignia, dog tags, and the carefully chosen name, Major William Martin, born in Cardiff in 1907, enlisted in 1928. Everything had to match Royal Navy records in case the Germans tried to cross-reference the identity. Then came the wallet litter, the personal items that would make Major Martin seem real. They included a photograph of a fictitious fiancée named Pam, along with 2 love letters written in a woman's handwriting. There were theater ticket stubs, a bank statement, a bill from a tailor, and a receipt for a diamond engagement ring. All meticulously crafted. Each item added depth and authenticity. The goal was to make it impossible for anyone to believe this was a fabrication. But the most important piece was the deception itself, the fake documents. Montague and Chumley, with help from high-ranking officials, drafted 2 key letters. One was from General Sir Archibald Nye, the Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, addressed to General Harold Alexander in North Africa. The letter referenced a planned invasion of Greece and Sardinia, while casually dismissing Sicily as a diversion. The other was a personal letter from Pam, filled with romantic longing, a human touch designed to seal the illusion. All these documents were placed inside a leather briefcase, which was attached to the corpse's wrist with a chain. The hope was that the body would wash ashore in a location where German intelligence could get hold of the contents, but in a way that seemed completely accidental. Now, the British needed a place that was neutral but vulnerable to Axis espionage. A place where the body could drift ashore, be discovered by locals, and passed, discreetly or deliberately, into German hands. Spain, and specifically the city of Huelva, was chosen. Though officially neutral, Spain had strong fascist sympathies and a web of German spies operating within its borders. The stage was set. The corpse was ready. The documents were in place. All that remained was to deliver the deception, and trust that Hitler would take the bait. In April 1943, under the cover of darkness and heavy security, the body of Major William Martin was placed inside a specially designed canister filled with dry ice. The container was loaded aboard HMS Seraph, a British submarine under the command of Lieutenant Commander Norman Jewell. This was no ordinary naval mission. Jewell and his crew were not told the full details, only that the operation was of the highest secrecy and utmost importance to the war effort. On April 30, 1943, the submarine surfaced off the southern coast of Spain, near the city of Huelva. The area was chosen carefully. It was close to German intelligence agents, but far enough from Allied activity to seem accidental. At around 4:30 in the morning, with the horizon still cloaked in night, the crew opened the canister and released the body into the sea. The corpse floated gently in the tide, the briefcase still chained to its wrist. Jewell saluted the body and offered a prayer. Though the man was already dead, the moment felt solemn, as if they were laying to rest a soldier who had given his life in one final, strange mission. Then, they turned the submarine and quietly disappeared beneath the waves. Just after sunrise, Spanish fishermen spotted the body. It had washed ashore at La Herradura beach, near Huelva. Authorities were notified, and soon the body and its briefcase were in the custody of local officials. The trap was now in motion. Spain was officially neutral, but in reality, it was crawling with German agents. The Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence service, had deep contacts in the region, including in Huelva. The British were counting on this. Their hope was that the Spanish authorities, whether out of sympathy or corruption, would pass the contents of the briefcase to the Germans, without the British knowing. To help this along, British diplomats in Spain began pretending to panic. They sent carefully crafted messages to London expressing deep concern about the lost briefcase and the sensitive materials it may have contained. These messages were designed to be intercepted. The more worried the British appeared, the more valuable the documents would seem. It was all part of the ruse. Sure enough, the Spanish delayed returning the briefcase. The documents remained in their custody for several days, more than enough time for photographs to be taken and for copies to be passed discreetly to German agents. Then, the briefcase was returned to the British embassy, supposedly unopened. But British intelligence had prepared for this. The documents had been lightly folded in a specific way. Upon their return, analysts confirmed the folds had changed, and the envelope seals had been tampered with. The messages had been read. The plan had worked, at least so far. Now, the British needed confirmation that the bait had been swallowed. This came, eventually, from the most unexpected source, Ultra, the Allied effort to intercept and decode German Enigma communications. Through decrypted messages, British intelligence soon learned that Hitler had fallen for the deception. He believed the invasion would come through Greece and Sardinia, not Sicily. He began redeploying troops, tanks, and aircraft to defend those locations. German High Command even instructed Italian defenses in Sicily to relax their readiness. The illusion had taken hold. It was one of the most incredible moments of the war, a silent victory, earned not with bombs or bullets, but with creativity, storytelling, and a carefully planted lie. And yet, the true test of Operation Mincemeat was still to come. The Allies were preparing to land in Sicily. If Hitler had truly believed the deception, then when the invasion began, the real test would be in how he responded. In the days following the discovery of Major William Martin's body, the deception began to ripple outward. In Berlin, Adolf Hitler read the falsified correspondence with deep interest. The documents, written with deliberate casualness, confirmed what he already suspected, that the Allies would strike in Greece and Sardinia. Sicily, mentioned only in passing, was dismissed as a decoy. This kind of subtle misdirection was exactly what the British hoped for. The more it echoed Hitler's preconceptions, the more likely he was to trust it. And trust it he did. Within days, German military intelligence was in motion. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, then stationed in France, was ordered to shift his attention eastward. The panzer divisions, Germany's elite armored units, began to move. Reinforcements were sent to Greece. Defenses in Sardinia were strengthened. More importantly, troops were drawn away from Sicily, the actual invasion point. From the shadows of Whitehall, Montague and Chumley monitored German movements using ultra intercepts. The information confirmed it. Hitler had taken the bait. One decrypted message from German High Command referred to the body as a perfect example of Allied carelessness. They believed it entirely. Back in Spain, the British played their part masterfully. The official reaction to the body's discovery was theatrical panic. A flood of urgent diplomatic cables, encrypted messages, and frantic meetings helped reinforce the illusion that something precious had been lost. British Ambassador Sir Samuel Hoare, a former spy himself, orchestrated the drama with just the right amount of tension. Every time Spain delayed returning the documents, the British appeared more desperate. But in private, they celebrated. Every day the briefcase remained in Spanish hands was another day for German agents to study its contents and reinforce the deception. Meanwhile, the identity of Major William Martin continued to hold up. In fact, his fictional persona had become one of the most elaborate lies ever told. Spanish authorities conducted an autopsy but found no reason to suspect foul play. They accepted the body as real. He was buried with full military honors in the Nuestra Señora Cemetery in Huelva. A headstone marked his grave. William Martin, born 1907, died 1943, served with honor. No one in Spain knew the truth. To add another layer of realism, British newspapers even published a death notice for Major Martin. His name was added to official Royal Navy lists. It was one of the rare cases in which a man who had never lived was mourned, memorialized, and remembered, all in the service of a grand illusion. Behind the scenes, Montague and Cholmondeley still held their breath. Deception in war is never guaranteed. They had tricked Hitler, for now, but the final measure of success would come when the Allies launched their real invasion of Sicily. If German troops responded quickly, if reinforcements poured into Sicily, then the ruse would have failed. The beaches would become killing fields. But if German response was delayed or scattered, if they focused on the wrong targets, then Operation Mincemeat would have saved thousands of lives. It was a gamble. A corpse, a briefcase, a handful of letters, all set against the full machinery of the Nazi war machine. It was espionage at its most creative, and perhaps its most fragile. The clock was ticking. Operation Husky, the code name for the Allied invasion of Sicily, was only weeks away. The Mediterranean shimmered under the hot sun of July 1943. Allied ships stretched across the horizon, warplanes roared overhead, and over 160,000 troops prepared to land on the beaches of Sicily in what would be one of the most ambitious amphibious assaults of the war. Operation Husky had begun. It was early morning on July 10, 1943, when British and American forces stormed ashore. Paratroopers dropped behind enemy lines, naval guns pounded coastal defenses, and landing craft surged toward the beaches, their metal hulls slicing through the surf. The air was tense, not just with the danger of enemy fire, but with the question that had been haunting the minds of those behind Operation Mincemeat: had it worked? Would German troops pour into Sicily in time to repel the attack? Or had the lie they planted in the pocket of a dead man truly taken hold? The answer came not in silence, but in the lack of chaos. There were German troops in Sicily, yes. Italian defenders were present as well. But there were fewer than expected, and they were poorly coordinated. Hitler had been so convinced by the forged documents that he had transferred several divisions away from Sicily to defend Greece and Sardinia, precisely what the British wanted. Even as the Allies surged inland, Hitler remained convinced that Sicily was a feint. For weeks, he refused to move reinforcements back. He believed the main assault would come later, in Greece. The illusion held long enough for the Allies to establish strong positions and begin the liberation of the island. In just over a month, Sicily fell. The campaign ended by mid-August 1943. Axis casualties were heavy, and more than 100,000 German and Italian troops were captured or killed. The success of Operation Husky would trigger a domino effect. Within weeks, Mussolini was overthrown, and Italy began to fracture politically and militarily. The Allied invasion of the Italian mainland soon followed, opening a new front and forcing Hitler to divert even more troops from the Eastern Front and from France. Back in London, the team behind Operation Mincemeat watched the events unfold with a mix of awe and relief. The deception had worked perfectly. It wasn't just that Hitler had believed the fake documents, it was how deeply he had internalized the lie. Even after the fall of Sicily, German intelligence clung to the idea that the invasion had been a diversion. This stubborn belief delayed German reaction in the Mediterranean and gave the Allies a critical advantage. Ewan Montague, reflecting on the operation, marveled at how something so outlandish, a plan involving a dead man and forged letters, had actually fooled one of the most suspicious regimes in history. The British war effort was full of daring operations, but few were as clever, subtle, and unexpectedly effective as this one. As for Major William Martin, the man who never was, he remained buried in Spain. His grave became a quiet, strange monument to a lie that saved lives. Flowers were often left by locals and by visiting British officers, honoring the role he played in one of the war's most remarkable acts of deception. But even in victory, the truth remained hidden. The public knew nothing about Operation Mincemeat. The success of the plan was buried under layers of classified reports and secret commendations. It would be years before the world learned how one corpse had helped change the course of the war. In the aftermath of the Allied invasion of Sicily and the collapse of Mussolini's regime, Europe was once again reshaped by shadows, steel, and strategy. But behind the tanks and triumphs lay a secret victory, one that could not be celebrated openly, even by those who had orchestrated it. Operation Mincemeat had been a resounding success, but it was also one of the most tightly guarded secrets of the war. In intelligence circles, success is often measured by how quietly it's kept. And for Ewan Montague, Charles Chumley, and the few others who knew the full truth, silence was part of the mission. The official story was simple. A Royal Marine named Major William Martin died in a plane crash and washed ashore in Spain. That was all the public, and even most of the military, were ever told. The truth remained locked behind layers of classification and official silence. Documents were archived in steel cabinets. Code names were scrubbed from reports. Even Winston Churchill, when he referred to the operation in internal briefings, called it an amazing piece of work, but left the details unspoken. Inside British intelligence, however, the mood was different. There was quiet celebration, a sense that something bold, risky, and brilliantly executed had not only worked but had likely saved thousands of lives. And yet, the war continued. Hitler's armies still occupied France. The Eastern Front remained a bloodbath. The Nazi regime was far from defeated. For the men and women of the XX Committee, the masterminds behind deception operations, there was little time to bask in the glow of Mincemeat's success. They were already working on new lies, new distractions, new ghosts to haunt German high command. But what of the man behind the myth? The identity of the real body used in Operation Mincemeat remained a secret even to many inside the operation. Official records identified him only as Major William Martin, a character who had never truly existed. It wasn't until decades later that the truth slowly came to light. The body was that of a Welshman named Glynwr Michael, a homeless man who had died after ingesting rat poison in an abandoned London warehouse. He had been lost to society, no family, no funeral, no one to mourn him. But in death, he became a silent hero, his body repurposed into the most unlikely weapon of the Second World War. Though he never knew it, Glynwr Michael helped defeat Hitler. As the war dragged on into 1944 and 1945, the ripple effects of Operation Mincemeat could still be felt. Germany had become increasingly distrustful of its own intelligence. Internal divisions grew within the Abwehr. Hitler, who had once prided himself on his instincts, became paranoid and increasingly isolated. The Allies continued using deception to mislead him, and time after time, it worked. In a war where truth was often obscured by chaos, lies, carefully crafted and beautifully delivered, became one of the Allies' most powerful tools. Montague, who returned to civilian life after the war, kept the secret for many years. He resumed his work as a barrister and later became a judge. Chumley returned to a quieter life as well, his role in one of the war's most daring operations remaining unknown to nearly everyone he met. In the quiet corners of history, they remained anonymous heroes. And somewhere in a cemetery in southern Spain, beneath a simple white cross, the man who never was continued to lie in peace, guarding the secret that changed a war. Even after the dust of Sicily settled, the psychological impact of Operation Mincemeat continued to echo deep inside Hitler's war machine. In Berlin, suspicion grew like mold behind locked doors. The documents recovered from Major William Martin had not only fooled the Führer, they had shifted the course of German strategy, and the consequences were beginning to mount. Hitler remained obsessed with the idea that Greece and the Balkans were the Allies' true objective. Even as the Allies poured troops into Italy and pushed northward from Sicily, he clung to the belief that it was still a diversion. Orders were issued to fortify the Peloponnese, to defend the Greek coastline, and to redirect troops from France and Russia towards southern Europe. German high command, already stretched thin across multiple fronts, had to comply. This overcommitment to the wrong locations weakened Germany's ability to respond where it mattered most. It diluted their strength in France, which months later would leave the Normandy beaches vulnerable during D-Day. It also added pressure to the Eastern Front, where the Red Army was gaining momentum. Operation Mincemeat didn't just help the Allies take Sicily, it helped fracture the larger German defense strategy. Meanwhile, inside German intelligence, the embarrassment of being duped stung deeply. Internal investigations were launched, but few were willing to speak up. Hitler had believed the documents. That belief had shaped national strategy. So admitting they'd been faked would have required admitting that his instincts had failed. And no one within the Nazi hierarchy dared to challenge Hitler's judgment openly. For Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of the Abwehr, this moment was particularly delicate. He had long harbored doubts about the Nazi regime and had secretly aided anti-Hitler resistance efforts. But the mincemeat debacle made his position more precarious. Suspicion grew, especially within the SS, who were eager to absorb the Abwehr into their own security empire. Mincemeat, in an indirect way, had shaken the Nazi intelligence structure. Back in Britain, Allied planners noted these shifts with careful optimism. Mincemeat had done more than protect the beaches of Sicily. It had proven that deception, when executed with precision and patience, could change the course of battle. And perhaps more importantly, it revealed that Hitler was not immune to manipulation. He could be tricked. He could be misled. That vulnerability would become central to future Allied deception efforts, including the most ambitious one of all, Operation Bodyguard, the elaborate plan to mislead Hitler about the location of the D-Day invasion. But for now, the team behind Mincemeat remained in the shadows. There were no medals, no public praise, no press coverage. The operation was still classified. Only a select few within British intelligence knew what had truly taken place. And they were already applying its lessons to the next phase of the war. Yet despite the silence, the ripples of Operation Mincemeat were real, and they were changing the battlefield. German generals were second-guessing Allied intentions. Troop movements became slower, more reactive, more fearful. The Reich, once driven by ruthless clarity, was now haunted by the idea that every scrap of intelligence might be another lie. And at the center of it all was a body on a beach, a forged letter, and a story so well told that even Hitler had believed it. By early 1944, the full value of Operation Mincemeat was being measured not only in troops diverted or battles won, but in trust broken. Within Hitler's inner circle, fear and suspicion had begun to replace the unshakable confidence that once defined the Nazi war effort. The Abwehr, already shaken by the Sicilian disaster, was now considered compromised. Hitler had become increasingly convinced that his intelligence services were either incompetent or infiltrated. This played directly into the hands of the SS, particularly Reinhard Heydrich's successor at the Reich Main Security Office, Ernst Kaltenbrunner, who was eager to consolidate power. By undermining the Abwehr's credibility, Operation Mincemeat had contributed to the slow but steady disintegration of the German intelligence community. Canaris, the head of the Abwehr and a covert opponent of the regime, fell under growing suspicion. In July 1944, he would be arrested for his connection to the failed assassination attempt on Hitler, the famous July 20th plot. But the seeds of his downfall were planted, in part, by the fallout from a floating briefcase and a man who never existed. For British intelligence, the success of Mincemeat was both a victory and a blueprint. It inspired bolder and more expansive deception operations. Plans that once seemed too elaborate or too risky now had a precedent. If Hitler could be convinced to misplace an entire army, what else could he be made to believe? That mindset led to the creation of Operation Bodyguard, the largest deception campaign of the war. Its most famous sub-operation, Fortitude, involved fake armies, inflatable tanks, false radio traffic, and double agents all working in concert to convince Hitler that the D-Day landings would occur in Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. The plan worked. and the spirit of mincemeat echoed in every forged map and every ghost battalion. Yet even as new operations unfolded, the legacy of mincemeat continued to quietly grow. The fictional life of Major William Martin had been thoroughly accepted by both enemies and allies. His story had become part of the official record. In Spain, his grave was visited by locals and diplomats alike. British officers stationed nearby took it upon themselves to maintain it, brushing away leaves, replacing faded flowers, and saluting in passing. For Ewan Montague, the success of the operation came with a strange mix of pride and discomfort. He had built a perfect illusion, but that illusion had required the use of a real human body, a man who, in life, had been abandoned by society. The ethics of it lingered. But in war, victory often demands uncomfortable choices. Montague eventually wrote a detailed but sanitized account of the operation in a book titled The Man Who Never Was. Published in 1953, it told the story without revealing the true identity of the man who played Major Martin. That detail would remain a secret for decades, until declassified records and persistent researchers uncovered the truth. The real man was GlynDWR Michael, a drifter from Wales who had died alone in London. He had no idea that in death, he would become a cornerstone of one of the most influential deception operations in military history. His body had served his country in a way no one could have predicted. Operation Mincemeat had started as a desperate idea, an outrageous gamble in a time of desperation. But it worked. And more than that, it endured. It shifted strategies, broke confidence, and helped set the stage for Allied victory. And still, most of the world remained unaware of how a homeless man and a handful of forged letters helped turn the tide of the most devastating war in human history. The war ended in 1945. Europe was left shattered, millions were dead, and the world had changed forever. Nations began to rebuild. Leaders were tried. Borders were redrawn. But amidst the grand history of victory and loss, Operation Mincemeat remained a ghost, a classified success buried beneath layers of official secrecy. For years after the war, the story was known only to a small circle of insiders. Those involved in the operation moved on with their lives, bound by silence. Ewan Montague returned to law and later served as a judge. Charles Chumley disappeared into civilian life. Norman Jewell, the submarine captain who delivered the body to the Spanish coast, received quiet commendations but never publicly spoke of the mission's details. Even GlynDWR Michael's name, the real man behind Major William Martin, remained unknown to the public. Officially, the grave in Huelva still bore the inscription of the fictional Royal Marine. And for many, that was enough. Major Martin had done his job. But time, curiosity, and the gradual declassification of wartime records began to peel back the layers of the lie. In 1953, Montague released The Man Who Never Was, a heavily censored account of Operation Mincemeat. The book became a bestseller and was adapted into a feature film just 3 years later. Both the book and the movie maintained the illusion. Major Martin was portrayed as a composite figure, his true origins left vague. The operation's brilliance was celebrated, but its human cost remained hidden. It wasn't until the 1990s that the full truth began to emerge. Researchers, historians, and journalists sifted through declassified files, medical records, and coroner's reports. The key breakthrough came when records of GlynDWR Michael's death were matched with autopsy reports from Spain. The timeline fit. The conditions of the body matched. Slowly, the pieces aligned. GlynDWR Michael was confirmed as the man behind the myth. He had been born in Wales in 1909, the son of a coal miner. After his parents' deaths, his life unraveled. He drifted between jobs, battled poverty, and eventually found himself homeless in London. In 1943, at the age of 34, he died after ingesting rat poison, possibly by accident, possibly not. In the eyes of society, he was a forgotten man. But in the hands of British intelligence, he became something more. The revelation sparked a renewed interest in Operation Mincemeat. For the first time, the public began to understand not just the brilliance of the deception, but the human story behind it, one of desperation, exploitation, and unexpected heroism. In 1997, after decades of anonymity, Glyndwr Michael's name was finally added to the gravestone in Welva. Below the original inscription, a second line was etched. Glyndwr Michael served as Major William Martin RM. It was a small gesture, long overdue, but meaningful. The man who never was had finally been acknowledged for who he truly had been. A life once deemed worthless had, in death, altered the fate of nations. The story of Operation Mincemeat remains one of the most extraordinary feats of deception in military history. But beyond the planning, the strategy, and the secret meetings, it is a reminder of something far more human, that sometimes, history turns not on the actions of great generals or kings, but on the fate of a single forgotten man, floating alone in the sea, carrying a lie too perfect not to believe. And the grand sweep of World War II, stories of heroism often center on the front lines, on bullets fired, battles won, and blood spilled. But the war was also shaped by quieter victories, whispers in the dark, secrets exchanged in alleyways, and elaborate lies told so well that they reshaped reality itself. Operation Mincemeat was one of those lies. It began with a question: how do you make your enemy look the wrong way? And it ended with the successful invasion of Sicily, the collapse of Mussolini's regime, and the slow unraveling of Nazi dominance in southern Europe. All because a handful of unlikely men had the imagination, audacity, and skill to turn a corpse into a message. And not just a message, but a weapon. The operation proved something revolutionary: that deception, when crafted with empathy and precision, could be more effective than firepower. It could change troop movements, redirect invasions, and outwit some of the most feared minds of the 20th century. It redefined what warfare could be, and what it meant to win. For Ewan Montague, the architect of the operation, the story lingered for the rest of his life. He had helped save lives with a lie. He knew the moral weight of what they'd done, using a man's body, without his consent, in service of a higher cause. Yet he also knew that, without mincemeat, thousands more might have died storming fortified beaches. He carried both truths quietly, with the kind of burden that only real intelligence officers ever fully understand. Charles Chumley, eccentric and meticulous, never received the fame he deserved. Overshadowed by Montague in later retellings, he faded into the background, just as he had during the operation itself. But those who knew the full story understood, without Chumley's patience, vision, and relentless detail, mincemeat might never have gotten off the ground. And then there was Glyndwr Michael, the man at the center of it all, a man who never knew he would become Major William Martin, Royal Marine, honored in death in a foreign land. His story is a reminder that even those society deems insignificant can leave an impact that echoes through history. Operation Mincemeat's influence didn't end in 1943. It shaped the planning of Operation Bodyguard, which successfully misled Hitler about the location of the Normandy landings in 1944. It set the foundation for post-war intelligence practices, influencing espionage theory, counterintelligence strategy, and military deception for generations to come. Today, in the age of digital warfare, misinformation campaigns, and psychological operations, the principles behind Operation Mincemeat feel more relevant than ever. Truth is powerful, but so is the illusion of truth. And when that illusion is delivered with care, patience, and purpose, it can alter the course of empires. On a quiet plot of earth in Huelva, Spain, flowers still appear at the grave of Major William Martin. Visitors leave notes. Some are British officers paying respect. Others are tourists drawn by the mystery. Some are simply moved by the strange poetry of the story, a man who never lived, buried with honors, because of the lives he helped save. In the end, Operation Mincemeat is not just a tale of deception. It is a testament to creativity under pressure, to courage that hides in unexpected places, and to the enduring truth that even in war, imagination can be the sharpest weapon of all. Thanks for listening to the story of Operation Mincemeat, one of the most brilliant deceptions in history. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Sleep well, and we'll see you in the next story.